EV enthusiasts beware.
The most expensive brick on the block.
Tesla shares lower ahead of the company's Q4.
GM has just announced their all-new zero-emission engine that will make electric and internal combustion vehicles obsolete. This all-new radical technology is said to be the next revolution in the automotive world and will drive us towards a completely eco-friendly future of cars. So, let's not waste any time and check out this new way of thinking as GM CEO announces this new engine that will change the world. What exactly is this all-new technology? GM has been searching for an alternative to EVs for years now, and their search has led them to the all-new compressed air technology. Compressed air has already been seen to be of limited use in the 19th century.
Now I know, that's when they show you this wheel, that's not the most convincing argument for compressed air. And actually that was one of the first things I thought of. It's like, oh, compressed air. I've heard of it maybe being experimented in with cars before, but how powerful would it actually be and how long would it last? Those would be, the two biggest questions that I would have about that. But I think if it can be made to work, yeah, I think that's a real option that could benefit the entire world.
With mine locomotives and trams in some European cities, the most notable of which is Paris. However, the technology has since been...
Again, they're showing you these trains, and they're not even like trains. They're like little kid trains. I don't know. They're not helping the argument right now, but they're getting somewhere, I promise.
Dropped and forgotten in favor of internal combustion engines because of their immediate potency. However, in the early 2010s, the French car manufacturer Peugeot saw the potential in combining compressed air with internal combustion engines into an all-new hybrid technology that retains the eco-friendliness of a regular hybrid without needing a battery.
Technologies like this that challenge the industry leaders that are already established normally get snuffed out. Think about electric vehicles in the 90s. Think about the decorticator, the thing that was going to be a rival to the cotton gin, and use hemp and make better products, and how hemp was demonized and the whole reefer madness marijuana movement started in order to basically cut that product off at the knees before it ever had a chance to see the light of day. So here we have another completely revolutionary type of technology that could potentially replace everyone's vehicles with something completely clean, very reliable, sustainable, doesn't require rare earth materials. Let's take a look.
While these prototypes didn't move far from the testing stage, they did spark a fair bit of interest from the rest of the automotive industry, most notably GM. GM saw the potential that compressed air vehicles harnessed. However, they also realized that such a technology needed a fair bit of development if it were to compete with regular internal combustion engines and the rise of EVs. As a result, GM started slowly researching and developing compressed air technology parallel to developing EVs and internal combustion vehicles. So, with that in mind, it's high time for us to tackle a very practical question, and that is, how do compressed air vehicles function? Compressed air vehicles function very differently from regular engines and EVs. You see, instead of having a conventional piston-driven engine or an electric motor, compressed air vehicles utilize specially designed pneumatic engines, also known as compressed air engines. These engines are, from a mechanical standpoint, very similar to regular internal combustion engines. The engine uses pistons, just like petrol-powered ones do. However, unlike combustion engines, the pistons of a pneumatic motor are connected to a spring, and instead of relying on an explosion that creates the piston motion, pneumatic motors introduce air into the chamber, increasing the pressure inside of it, which pushes the piston to its maximum length. The air is then released, and the spring that the piston is attached to.
So the air that they're showing go into where the piston is, that almost think about like that is kind of like the fuel that would be going into the piston of an internal combustion engine, but there's also like an ignition source in there that would ignite that fuel, that would create the explosion, that would force the piston up. So in this case, it's just purely just the pressure of the air that's being pumped into here that's going to move the piston. And I think there's tremendous value for even this as well. I mean, think about a car that doesn't have these mini explosions happening in it like 1,000 times over, that are not, having gasoline flow through the engines. Instead, it's just air. Like, how much less corrosive and damaging would that be on a vehicle, and what would that do for the vehicle's lifespan ultimately? Now, one thing that I do have a question about with this is, if we're talking about compressed air, things have to be airtight. I mean, leaks would be rather costly with this, and like, how would you be able to detect that? I'm sure there are ways to do it. I just have questions about it. But I mean, so far, I like the way this is looking. I think that this looks safer. I think it looks simpler. I think it looks like a more effective answer to how do we, build things that move people from one place to another sustainably.
Pulls it back into its original position, thus completing the cycle. Generally speaking, the engine is very similar to internal combustion engines, and can therefore use a wide array of technical solutions, shortening the development cycle, which is what also drew GM towards this concept. With that in mind, it's time to answer the most intriguing question. What are the benefits of compressed air against EVs and ICE vehicles? Well, the most notable
ICE being internal combustion engine. I'm pretty sure most of you caught that, but
benefit is, of course, the fact that it is 100% pollution-free. It's just pressured up air, meaning that there is no environmental damage being done while it functions. As a result, compressed air engines solve one of the biggest issues regular combustion engines have, and that is direct pollution of the environment. Compressed air engines also beat out EVs in this regard, as making a compressed air engine is far cheaper and requires no rare earth materials, much unlike batteries or electric motors. Not to mention that
the rare earth materials bit is actually really important. And I know that right here we're seeing like trucks and equipment, collect the rare earth elements, but one of the things that you need for batteries is cobalt. And really there's just one country in Africa that is like produces like a third or more of the world's cobalt. It's all very concentrated in one place. And, they're just open pits similar to this, but instead of just seeing these few vehicles roam about, imagine this just completely covered end to end with people picking and digging cobalt out of the ground, sometimes with their hands, sometimes with tools. They're not wearing protective equipment. Cobalt isn't something that you want to breathe in. Cobalt is a blue substance, comes out of the ground, and there's just places where it's rich with it. And another thing on top of that, here's another reason, and this, I can see how people will be conflicted with this thought, but those people are being harmed because they believe that this is the only way that they can have a source of income. But that source of income is so underserved. Like, I mean, like they're being underpaid so much for this material, this substance. And the country is really just, legally being robbed of this substance because they are not valuing it for what it's really worth, what it really can do for people. They're taking pennies on the dollar for this stuff when, they should be greatly benefiting from the fact that they have something that the world so desperately needs, even if not for electric vehicles, for all other electronics. But to not have to rely on that in that way of acquiring those rare earth elements, I think is very important.
Much unlike batteries or electric motors. Not to mention that powering EVs is also not quite green, as the grid is still mostly reliant on fossil fuels to produce electricity. Speaking of making compressed air...
And I kind of hate that argument so much, because yes, it is true, right now, an electric vehicle has to rely on a fossil-fueled infrastructure, electrical grid, in order to power itself. And that's true. So the answer isn't get rid of the electric car. The answer is how do we reshape the electrical grid to not include fossil fuels? Because we have enough solutions between all of the stuff that people have been preaching for the longest, like wind and solar, which, you know, some people don't like for somewhat valid reasons. You know, you can't dismiss some of the downsides of each thing. And I mean, we got geothermal, we got hydropower, we got nuclear, micronuclear, and I know people are going to go, nuclear? Well, look into it first. Look into micronuclear reactors. How about that? You do that, then you come back and you leave a comment. But until then, don't just be like, oh, I watched Chernobyl. No, we got so many other ways beyond solar, beyond wind, that are not fossil fuels that we could, if we really wanted to invest and actually build out the fucking infrastructure, which is what you have to do for damn near anything. Like we wouldn't have cell phones if there was not the infrastructure of the network of towers. Like you have to build that thing in order to make the tiny device in your pocket work. You can't have sat phones without satellites. You got to invest in that in order to make the tiny device work. Do you understand? Anyway, I just hate that argument. It's a bullshit argument, and they're pointing, their finger in the wrong direction.
Engines. Another key benefit over internal combustion engines is the cost of production. Since compressed air engines endure considerably lower pressures than gasoline or diesel engines, producing them means that there will be a lesser need for strong and hardened steel or metal. This makes them both more economically viable, as well as more eco-friendly to produce in larger quantities. And while the differences might not be as substantial as compared to EVs, they're still there. Oh, and also, it goes without saying that the running costs of compressed air engines are simply unrivaled. Compressed air is much cheaper than fuel or electricity, and it's also much easier to acquire. Not to mention that these engines will be 100% future-proof, as they don't waste anything. They just use pressurized air that, after it exits the chamber, remains structurally unchanged. However, as potent as they sound, compressed air engines have a few drawbacks that keep them from being developed and used on a wider scale. Are there any drawbacks to this technology? Unfortunately, there are a few glaring issues that arise from using compressed air engines, which made them quite situational and even borderline useless in the past. The first problem is the fact that compressed air engines are extremely underpowered. Pressurized air has a very low energy density, which considerably lowers its potency. Plus, due to them having light components and them not producing high amounts of pressure, the torque of such engines is extremely lackluster, which makes them much less usable in the real world. The engine also has to spin at quite high RPM, which, considering it's a fully mechanical contraption, leads to excessive wearing of components. And if that wasn't enough, since the engine does not utilize liquid as its main propellant, introducing lubricators into the engine isn't as easy as on internal combustion engines. However, the biggest issue that compressed air engines face is the fact that they are extremely inefficient. And while this might sound inessential, seeing how compressed air is virtually free, this couldn't be further from the truth. Most prototype compressed air vehicles that have been developed have a range of only 140 kilometers, which is less than 100 miles. This means that, first of all, you would have to fill it up constantly, and, second of all, you couldn't reliably go on a moderately long trip, let alone a long one. Finally, there's the question of safety. Most prototypes used regular, steel air tanks for storing pressurized air, due to a lack of a better solution. This meant that the car, which was already gutless in itself, would be prominently less potent due to increased weight, while also being susceptible to explosions if the tanks were damaged, as you were, after all, sitting on a bunch of pressurized gas. That said, GM has been...
Okay, so what do you think? You know, of course they're going to tell you how they've gotten around these things, but I mean, those are obviously concerns that I would have as far as a vehicle that runs off of pressurized air. But I would also have the thought of, as we move forward, technology will advance and will eventually discover a way to make these vehicles more usable, more efficient. So I just am really disappointed when people just look at the drawbacks of where something is and they go, oh, well, it doesn't do that like that other thing. Well, guess what? We've spent all of our time, money, and resources developing that other thing. That's why it's so kick-ass. And if we spent those same resources on this other thing, we might not have chosen the former. So people just don't understand that as time progresses, people are really just going to figure out everything. And we just have to give things the attention if that's the direction that we want to go.
Working extremely hard on ridding this technology of its glaring issues, and they have been quite successful at it. First of all, the problem of the car's power has been solved with the introduction of new high-pressure air tanks. These high-pressure tanks compress the air even further, which translates into higher cylinder pressure. As a result, GM's new compressed air prototype achieves performance figures that are pretty comparable to regular gasoline engines. Sure, the torque isn't quite there yet. However, they're still powerful enough for a normal commuter vehicle. Furthermore, GM has also found a way to extend the vehicle's range. How? Well, by turning the vehicle's chassis into one large compressed air reservoir. However, this requires the vehicle to be specifically developed with compressed air engines in mind. This includes specific reinforcements of, or even the usage of composite materials, such as fiber-reinforced thermoplastics. This allows the vehicle to retain exceptionally low weight, while also being much safer than using regular high-pressure tanks, as crashing and rupturing the reservoir won't lead to an explosion, no matter what.
Wait a minute. We have to go back 1 second. What is this guy? This guy cannot just get off of the phone. So I'm looking at him right over here.
Crashing and rupturing the reservoir won't
He's
lead
on the
to an
phone.
explosion, no matter
Stays
what.
on the phone
When will this technology be
while
implemented?
he's running.
Well, the answer to that question is incredibly complex. However, there is a very solid possibility of these engines entering mass production in the next few years. This is because, as can be concluded, GM has truly invested itself in making this engine a reality. They keep researching and developing.
But this is cool. I really do hope they stay on top of this. But one really big worry that this particular piece goes on to talk about, that is something that I did bring up earlier, is you have to think about the people that have already invested in the former. The people that have invested in the internal combustion engines that don't, in their minds, see a need to now go out of their way to try to catch up with GM as far as developing their own air-powered car. So I'm sure that some might take the strategy of, well, can we just tank the air-powered car? Whether it be, just trying to kill it in the public sphere with misinformation, or trying to, really make up some legislation that goes after it, which I don't know, really, aside from corruption, why any politician would be against having a vehicle that would be more affordable, more reliable, more sustainable, just better all around. It would just even be better just to not smell exhaust on the road when you drive. How much better would that be? That's a tiny reason, but I feel like that reason would be the bigger reason in a lot of people's minds. Like, if you're just behind some, truck and they, have a slightly fucked up engine and they kick out a ton of black smoke and you're right behind them, do you think it's fun? For those stupid motherfuckers that like to, blast black smoke at cars, whatever dumbass name that you have for it. If you were the recipient of that, if someone did that to you, I'm pretty sure there are some people that do that to each other and they're like, but yeah, it's just not great. Who wants it? Who says, listen, we need exhaust and we need it to smell like something that might kill you? So, no, I applaud GM for going with this. Anytime people try to go into a space and they haven't won over the public sphere yet, as far as people's opinions, and it challenges the technological status quo, the people that are already, have money invested in this, that might do something to try to tear down the efforts to build something more sustainable. Because we've seen it happen before, and I'm sure it will happen again. because people are people no matter where or when you go. Anyway, did you like this? Leave a like if you did, subscribe if you did, and if you have any ideas or thoughts or stuff on other things that you would like for me to see or things that might be related to this very topic, please, of course, let me know. Also got some merch, also got some other channels. Definitely check those out. But I appreciate you watching, and take it easy.